Now it's my pleasure to introduce Paul Moore, who's a farmer nearby here in the south of Ireland. We're neighbours down on the south coast of the Irish Republic. And Paul will speak to us in terms of encouraging biodiversity on his commercial farm. So, Paul, if you can jump in there.
Yep. Can you see my screen there?
Yeah, perfect. Star. Well done.
Grand. Yeah, thanks. Right, good afternoon, everybody. Paul Moore is my name. I'm a tillage and beef farmer in Cork, as Ryan said, on the south coast of Ireland here. I suppose every show needs a villain. That I'll confess I'm not entirely regenerative. I'm moving slightly that way, but I can see from where I'm sitting, I can see my plough out in the yard here. So I'm gradually moving towards regenerative farming, but I'm not there yet. So my main interest has always been kind of the above ground biodiversity. So that's what I'm going to talk about today. So here is it's not a terribly clear map, but you can see the green areas here. This is a map of the Republic of Ireland, and the green areas are the arable growing, the tillage areas of the country. So kind of south and east of the country, you know, in a minority. So the rest of the country would be mainly grassland for dairying and beef. Now, grassland in the European Union would be, I suppose, considered a slightly threatened habitat. But if your impression of grassland is, you know, wildflower meadows and steppe-like habitat, that's not really the case here. We grow grass very well in Ireland. We have a temperate climate. We don't get extremes of temperature. We get rain all year round. So we have a lot of grass, but it's biodiversity poor, it must be said, by and large. It's single species perennial ryegrass. And obviously there are exceptions to every rule, but in general, this is it. So the main habitat types you get on all these farms would be the hedgerows. So the hedgerows are the old field boundaries that were planted to provide a stock-proof fence, or to just colonize naturally the walls that were there, colonized naturally with woody plants. But you can see from the selection here, and it's not just grassland, it's tillage as well. The hedgerows are very often quite poor in terms of structure and in terms of species diversity. There's, you know, lots of gaps. The management is cut them down to the bone, or remove them entirely, I suppose. So why is that? And I suppose what it boils down to is that they're looked on as waste ground. They're not appreciated for the ecosystem services they provide. Hedgerows, as I'll hope you'll see in a minute on my farm, they can provide multiple ecosystem services, but that's not appreciated. It's not appreciated generally out with the public or with farmers, and it's not appreciated in policy, in terms of agricultural policy either. So my farm and my approach, I just flick between the two, the contrasts in the hedgerows. I suppose my approach is very, very simple. It's just take a sympathetic approach to the habitats that are there, manage them. So management is key. I think you can appreciate the difference there between the hedgerow that's cut down to the bone, cut down very low, and the ones that are just left, like here, grow up. So it's just leaving a bit more space for nature, and not feeling the urge to farm every square meter of ground, and to let the marginal areas remain marginal, rather than trying to extract the last euro out of them, shall we say. So it's very, very simple. This could apply to any farm. This is my farm, obviously, that I'm talking about. So my approach, as I said, very simple. Just take a more sympathetic approach to the habitats that I do have. And apart from the management of those habitats, then there's just the diversity and maintaining a diversity of habitats. So we've got the hedgerows here on the left, and in the bottom left, then so some smaller hedgerows, some species of birds prefer a smaller, lower hedgerow. Some type of plants, gorse here would be the predominant one in the near hedgerow on the bottom left there. And in the background then you've got tall, mature trees. And I suppose because, you know, that biodiversity that we find on farms has been my interest, I tend to I suppose, be a bit obsessive almost, maybe in some ways, in terms of micromanaging something. So on the right, you have, you can see dead trees. So I have a lot of elm trees, which are very susceptible to Dutch elm disease. So they get to a certain height, Dutch elm disease attacks, they all die off, but then they start regenerating again from ground up, and they get to about 20 years of age again, and it's a constantly repeating process. But I let the dead trees, so I have about 150 dead trees, I think, on my farm, and you can see on the right here, lots of wood boring insects appreciate those. So it's you know, tiny habitats in themselves, but just adding to the diversity. Then the middle photograph here, it's not a very good photograph. So this is a bee scrape, and I was involved with a project that, well, we claim that we came up with the idea. And it's quite simply how I create what it is I suppose 2 meters by 1 meter wide, just a bare earth, south facing on the bank and a hedgerow. And you make it very simply by putting the front bucket on your tractor loader, driving up against the hedgerow and driving into the hedgerow effectively and scraping the ground down so that you create a bare scrape. And that allows a number of bee species, mining bees, to colonize these areas of bare ground, which wouldn't otherwise exist if you've got a kind of an overgrown hedgerow. They just need some bare ground. So again, it's just a tiny habitat, but I have a number of these around the farm, and they are successful. They are being colonized by the bees. So apart from the management, it's also the diversity. So then I suppose the question is, what's a habitat? Now, a regenerative farming webinar showing winter stubble, bare ground might be a heinous sin, but leaving winter stubble, I mainly grow spring crops. Winter stubble is a very valuable habitat for a number of bird species and a number of wildflower species. The middle photo here, a boat on my farm. Last month, photographs were taken. So you can see it's not bare ground. There is natural, because we're quite mild here, as I said, you get natural regeneration. There's 7 or 8 different wildflower species in these fields here. And a whole load of birds as well use them as wintering habitats. The loss of winter stubble has been implicated in the declines of a number of bird species, with conversion or with switching to autumn sown cereals. On the bottom right here, you can see I do grow cover crops. So there's about 5 species, I think, in this example here. Again, I don't need to tell anybody here about the benefit of cover crops over winter, but they're also a very valuable habitat for birds, and I'm involved in a study at the moment just in terms of estimating and managing, or trying to figure out what are the best crops to sow for birds over winter. And then I've spoken about management and how important management is, the importance of good management versus bad management. So top right here, you have another farm, not my farm. You can see this farmer has sprayed off all his stubble fields in early December with glyphosate. Now the farming thinking behind it would be, it's a nice clean field, fresh start in the spring when he goes to plough. Doesn't have to worry about any weeds or carryover of disease or pest over the winter. But it's obvious that's a dead zone. I mean, the hedgerows are poor for a start, but that's a complete dead zone. It's not sequestering any carbon. It's not preventing any water. It's not soaking up or holding any water. It's not holding any nutrients. It's really bad practice in terms of good practice for farming, poor practice in terms of any environmental benefit that you might gain from a field. So then that's the farmed habitat, shall we say, the infield habitat. So the marginal areas then, as I said, I just let them remain marginal. You know, there is a cost benefit analysis to how, you know, in terms of draining areas like this. So this is a small wetland area, about 2 hectares on my farm that I just leave. I just leave it. I don't fertilize it or anything. It's quite wet. It's got a few small ponds in it. And what grows there. Cattle are in there. You can see there on the top right. Cattle are in there over the summer, grazing it. A lot of nettles in places, which I do top later in the year, but you can see the number of caterpillars of about 4 or 5 different species of butterfly that are in these nettles. So it's just an area. This is part of a scheme, an environment, the National Agri-Environment Scheme called the GLOS scheme. But funnily enough, it's not classed, it's not qualifying as a wetland area. It qualifies as low input permanent pasture. So grassland that doesn't get a lot of fertilizer, because there was no category for a wetland in that scheme. So I just put it in as pasture, which it is grazed. But just taking a sympathetic approach, not trying to, as I said, to manage everything to the nth degree. I think a lot of people, a lot of farmers spend a lot of time looking over the boundary fence at what the neighbours are doing. I'm sure if my neighbours are looking over at me, they probably think I'm a disgrace. But you know, I won't say the feeling is mutual, but you know, I hope that maybe that they can appreciate it, or they will appreciate it in time, what I'm doing. So then again, coming back to the management, the importance of management. I'm in, as I said, the National Agri-Environment Scheme, the GLOS scheme. So the two slides, 2 pictures on the left here. Top one is my one, so it's a nest box for barn owls that I've put up with those barn owls in it. And the one below that then is on another farm, I don't know whose, but obviously they couldn't find a tree on their farm to put the nest boxes on, so they erected, and they did a very nice job of it. They put up a metal pole, put the nest boxes up on the pole, but it's out beside a busy road, so I hope nothing nests in those nest boxes, because, well, it probably won't last long with the cars going by. They'll be probably any bird would be dead within a week. So it's just again to illustrate management. Management is key. Doing something correctly versus doing it incorrectly or not doing it as well as you could. And this is part of the problem, I suppose, with the schemes that are there at the moment, that there isn't any reward for doing it properly, and there's no penalty for not doing it properly. There's no results-based element to schemes at the moment, or any payments that farmers get. It's just the fact that you've done it. It ticks a box. But you can see the difference. Hopefully I've shown the difference a few times of the difference that makes. So then the middle one is, this is wild bird cover. So this is basically a seed crop, or multiple seeds sown over winter, part of the GLOS scheme again. So the scheme as it is, it's a bit unambitious in terms of for this, and this is quite a popular measure. You have to sow 2 different seed-bearing crops to qualify for this in this scheme. I think there's a mixture of about 7 different seed-bearing crops in this. And one of the reasons this measure isn't very popular is that the feeling is that it attracts rodents, which it can do. So you've got lots of seeds from lots of different plants falling on the ground. People don't want to encourage rats and stuff to increase on their farms. So it may not be popular with some people, but I've taken the approach of providing perches for barn owls. So there's just a few sticks. These are old broken fence posts that I drive into the ground as perches for barn owls. And as I said in some movie or other, that if you build it, they will come. You can see on the right here, barn owl on the farm, just perched on one of those posts, hunting for rodents that are in the crop. So just my final slide here now. I've done some farm walks. These are kind of non-farmers, I suppose, nature enthusiasts or wildlife enthusiasts, bringing in people out and showing them where their food comes from, suggesting maybe they'd like to pay a bit more for it and appreciate the good food, as in the food that where you go a little bit further. to do something more for the environment, whether it's wildlife or carbon sequestration or whatever, because as a farmer, I suppose that's would always be my gripe, that the problem is, food has gotten so cheap. My late father was getting paid an awful lot more for producing grain in the 1980s than I am now. So, that's a strange system, the way that has gone. So I suppose if there's one takeaway from this short presentation is that management matters. Good management versus bad management. So good management should be rewarded, bad management, not, obviously. So thank you very much.
Well done, Paul. Lots of questions coming in, and please keep throwing those questions into the chat, because, as I said, this is good. All of this is going to help us to shape the follow-up seminars that we're going to be hosting on all of these subjects. Paul is a true gentleman and an innovator of his time in farming in this area, and what he's doing is a step ahead of so many more in terms of, I suppose, our future, in terms of the balance between production and I suppose nurture and care for the land that we live in. So now